Welcome to the Manitowish Waters Historical Society's screencast, Threads of Manitowish Waters History, the sixth installment on our series, History and Evolution of the Manitowish Chain, will focus on treaties and early land ownership. The United States government treated Native American communities, or First Nation communities, as sovereign nations, meaning that they had full rights and authority through the Constitution to make treaties with the Ojibwa. As you can see in the map, there were several cessions of land where the land was ceded or given to the federal government. The 1937 White Pine Treaty in yellow and the 1942 Copper Treaty in green are the cessions of land that most apply to the Manitowish Chain. The black arrow indicates very clearly where Manitowish waters would be, and it was the 1842 treaty that codified this transfer of land. The Ojibwa exchanged their land for the promise of reservations, annuity payments, services, and the rights to hunt, fish, and gather on the lands they ceded. A little-known point of history in the Northwoods was that the Ojibwa were aware of pressures from the federal government to remove the Ojibwa and send them west, as had happened to the Cherokee. In response, the Ojibwa around Lake Superior created a petition in 1848 to request that reservations be set up east of the Mississippi River, protecting the Ojibwa in the Northwoods area and the Manitowish Chain. The image below was created by Seth Eastman, an artist attached to the Department of the Army, and the Ojibwa story below for the Trout Lake band, the chief of which was Cadistano, was included with 4 other pictographs, all showing support for the 1848 petition, representing the interests of the Ojibwa on the Manitowish Chain. As you can see with the highlighted text, Trout Lake was identified as the best site in the 1848 proposal for an Ojibwa reservation and community, limited to only 4 sections of land. These sections would probably be indicated by these yellow arrows surrounding the Trout Lake camp. Section 14 is where the Trout Lake village was. The government was not interested in the 1848 petition and chose instead to activate their removal policy. This policy was tragic and had significant repercussions. The Sandy Lake removal, where the Ojibwa were all to go, as marked by the yellow arrow, led to 400 Ojibwa deaths. This motivated an activism among Ojibwa leaders, particularly Chief Buffalo. Traveling to Washington, D.C., Chief Buffalo gained an audience with Millard Fillmore, President of the United States, who was inspired by the tragedy at Sandy Lake to reverse the removal order and move forward with the Treaty of 1854. In the Treaty of 1854, Lac Du Flambeau was formally established as a reservation for the Ojibwa in the area in the Manitowish Chain region. Importantly, the size and scope of the Lac Du Flambeau Reservation is going to be much larger than Trout Lake. Instead of 4 square miles at Trout Lake, Lac Du Flambeau today covers 144 square miles. The land, though, that the Ojibwa had controlled for centuries, most of it has now transferred to the federal government. Almost immediately after this transfer, timber cruisers and surveyors moved across the land, blazing trees and taking careful notes in order to document the most prized land and resources for their acquisition. The trig map to the right is a compilation of all of the original surveys put together with the survey notes. If you'll take a look at the two yellow arrows to the right, those are in Manitowish waters on the Manitowish Chain at Benson and the inlet of Rest Lake. And the notation states that a large amount of pines will soon be taken to market. This is in 1862 during the beginning of the Civil War, showing how early the land was being utilized for its great natural resources. Here's an 1862 survey map that was from this analysis showing what the chain looked like to potential buyers as they were trying to go through and find the best lands. The competition for this land was very intense. The U.S. government lacked the resources to fund important programs like railroads and agricultural education, so they created land grants where vast amounts of land were given away to railroads and universities supporting agriculture to be sold and then fund these projects. In the left-hand corner, you can see the huge amount of land the Central Wisconsin Railroad received, square miles in a checkerboard pattern, all the way from central Wisconsin to Ashland and Superior, Wisconsin. You can see on the next panel to the right, under the yellow arrow, Central Wisconsin Railroad property right on the Manitowish River near Manitowish, Wisconsin. To the right, Cornell University had great access under the Morrill Land Grant Act as well that gave them authority. Wisconsin had land grant authority as well. Madison, River Falls, and Platteville are all agricultural land grant colleges that were started through this process, but Cornell took this to a whole new level in New York. A book, The Wisconsin Pine Lands of Cornell University, is an interesting read to be sure. Under the Morrill Land Grant, the populous state of New York had more access than other states to these federal lands. Cornell wanted to create a university that today bears his name. He claimed 500,000 acres of land in the Chippewa Valley and then sold that, working with land agents to fund his university. Cornell and a land agent in Eau Claire by the name of Putnam strategically bought and sold land, all to the great advantage and ultimately financing much of the construction of Cornell University. An interesting thing for property owners on the Manitowish Chain or anywhere else to do is to take a look at their abstracts to see the long line of owners on their property. To the right is an abstract that shows the Mississippi River Logging Company, owned by Frederick Weyerhaeuser, really operated much of the logging interests around the Manitowish Chain. And later on, he will sell his interests in the Mississippi River Logging Company to another corporation that he owned, the Chippewa Lumber and Boom Company. Matter of fact, the Weyerhaeuser Syndicate was well known, creating many of these shell businesses and corporations that gave him further advantage. One can honestly see at this point how a pioneer or someone seeking a homestead would be crowded out by railroads, Cornell University, logging companies, logging syndicates, and all these groups were working together as kind of a cartel to control the price and the supply of land. Early dam operations along the Mississippi River Logging Company, owned by Weyerhaeuser, started in 1887 and 1888. This started river drive logging that's evidenced in the right-hand side in Manitowish waters today. That's the site of the pea patch. The image to the left illustrates railroad logging that will follow. This is an image of the mill in Winchester. In Manitowish waters and along the Manitowish Chain, Steamboats were often used to raft logs to railroad logging hoist, as well as the Rest Lake dam site for river drive logging. These steamboats, paddle wheels, were very important in the early logging days in empowering the landowners, large lumber corporations and logging corporations, to be able to harvest the resources for their profits. The logging railroads reached Manitowish Chain in 1900 to the south and by 1905 to the north, allowing a great deal of access for logging and defining much of the land ownership in the region being that of logging companies. Now, Northwood lands policies really favored corporate power, universities, wealthy speculators, and alike. The 1862 Homestead Act that was made to empower individual American citizens to get their slice of the American dream was really somewhat evasive. Matter of fact, in northern Wisconsin, settlers were handed a fixed deck where they had trouble gaining access to their own homesteads and ownership of property. More than half of the early pioneers were facing many days of travel to go to the county seats to try to record their property. Some risked being identified as squatters because they didn't make their application for land as early as some of the more wealthy and powerful interests. It was incumbent on the pioneers to prove that they had squatter rights through the Preemption Act from 1841 to 1891, and other obstacles would include recording fees, fines, back taxes, and land agents like Mr. Putnam, who would be more interested in satisfying his corporate customers rather than locals. Not surprisingly, many of the locals in the area and early pioneers participated in some timber trespass and occupied lands and took resources to try to get their slice of the American dream. If you really take a look at the image to your right, a 1913 plat of this region, it would make a perfect board game for a rural version of Northwoods 19th century Monopoly, as regular folks tried to navigate their way through the complexities of land ownership and just making a living. Really, when you look to the north of the township of Manitowish to Winchester, you can see that 95% of the land in Winchester was owned by logging businesses and other corporations. Importantly, on all these 1913 maps, you'll often see cited F.I. Carpenter. That was a large mining corporation seeking mineral rights and mineral wealths in the area. Land policy and confusion and manipulations created conflicts for many Northwoods pioneering families. To the upper left, the Devine family had difficulty because of their Native American status and tribal membership, and their property was cited as being unknown in 1913 when Dan Devine, the patriarch of the family, had received that land as a veteran in the Civil War. The Chippewa Flambeau Improvement Company also contested some of the ownership of the Ilge family. Peter Vance, pictured in the middle of the slide, also had a cease and desist order from those acquiring property on Rest Lake because much of his buildings and boats were still on the property. Abe Lefebvre literally had to straighten out his property challenges as one of the very earliest residents in the region all the way into the 1930s. And finally, the Laporte family on the Laporte homestead in Manitowish also had challenges on their homestead that they started in 1912 and 1913. As we transition from the pioneers and logging companies to the resorts and early summer owners in the region, the absence of pioneer names shouldn't be alarming to you. It is actually evidence of the land challenges that faced many of those who founded the community. The next series of slides documents private land ownership in 1913 with yellow arrows. Only 25 private land owners were identified on these plats. If you have the correct spelling of some of the names listed, please share them with the Manitowish Waters Historical Society, and we will do our best to correct those. The images that we have for these early plats came from an online source, and it's impossible for us to improve their quality, so we apologize in advance. So let's take a look at the 4 quadrants of the township of Manitowish Waters and see the families who were owning private property in 1913. So, Southgate on Little Trout and Alder Lake, Lovelace on Alder Lake, Ingman at Deer Park Lodge, Bremen and Lapeer. Moving to the southwest corner of the township of Manitowish Waters, a lot of farming took place here. Peer, Slate, Sullivan, and Navirith were property owners. In the area in the northeast part of the chain in Manitowish Waters, the arrow in the upper right under unknown is actually the Devine family, as I discussed earlier. Many other resorts started in this region, and I'm not going to read through them all, but you can pause at this point and inspect them and get some insights on the baseline of early ownership on the chain. Moving to the northwest corner of town, we see a lot of familiar names like Fox for Fox Island, Mitchell for Mitchell's Resort, and Vance for Peter Vance. Again, you can go through these as well, pause this screencast, and make some more inquiries and explorations. Note that we haven't seen a lot of the pioneer names, and we covered that earlier, why they were omitted from the early plat books. Finally, out of Manitowish Waters, but certainly on the Manitowish Chain, we see that Lovelace had property over by Highway 10 or Highway 51, which would probably be the Cassine farm property along the Manitowish River. Pier, once again, and Spiegel probably extending from the Manitowish side along the north part of Island Lake. Robert Lovelace is a good example of an early pioneer who came up here and struggled working for Southgate on Little Trout Lake. And ultimately, in 1909 and 1910, he acquired several sections of land, creating his slice of the American dream. We hope you enjoyed our presentation on treaties and early land ownership. Treaties were critical in transferring land from the Native American community, specifically the Ojibwa, to the federal government, establishing reservations, treaty rights, annuities, and services. Early land ownership proved to be a challenge for homesteaders because it was dominated by wealthy corporations, railroads, and land grants given to universities. Finally, early pioneer land claims were challenged, and some early residents had struggles with establishing their right to their original homesteads and being accurately represented on government documents. If you're interested in connecting with Manitowish Waters Historical Society, you can join our team by becoming a member or just get a free copy of our newsletter. And always please visit our website to get more insights into our local history by clicking on the appropriate tab below.